your preferred partner for custom software development and technology outsourcing. We offer state-of-the-art customized software development services that are client-centric, flexible, and secure to empower businesses.
And it's, I say, great to be back. Thanks, Rich. And so it looked like about 80% of you know who I am. So there are probably 20% going, who is this guy? And as Carl said, I literally sat in your chairs, I stood in your booths, and I've been up here before. I was the founder of Snowshore Networks, founder and CTO of Brook Trout and Cantata, which are names from the voice over IP world you probably know, as well as BEA Systems, and I was CTO of Newstar. So if any of you had clients or customers who ported their numbers, thank you very much. That paid for a college education. But since I'm no longer in that world, I am a professor at Georgetown, computer science, doing cybersecurity and communications, distributed ledger technology, which is the hoity-toity way of saying blockchain. And that's not what I'm here to talk about either, because I am, as Carl asked, I'm back from doing government service, where I was the CTO of the FCC, and worked on some interesting things. Some things that may have affected you positively or negatively. How many people here like getting illegal robocalls? Oh, no. I actually do kind of enjoy it because I play with them. I consider it like a cat and mouse game, and my personal best is 22 minutes, keeping a live person online. So what got me to the FCC initially was to make the rollout of Stir and Shaken actually happen. This is like a classic out of the economics textbooks role of government, because anyone who spends money deploying Stir and Shaken is protecting their competitors, and it's just a cost to them. But it's a commons thing, because if everyone's spent on Stir and Shaken, then everyone's costs go down, customer satisfaction goes up, revenues go up. So literally I had people whispering in my ears, please make us do this. Now, of course, they're lobbying arms and their government relations people, oh, over our dead bodies would we accept regulation? And then their network engineering people would tell them, no, we got to do this. So that is rolling out. There's a mandate coming. Some controversy, because you notice I said, and words in DC are important and meaningful. I asked, who doesn't like illegal robocalls? I didn't say who doesn't like robocalls. Because, and some of you do outbound calling, some of you support enterprises that have contact centers. There are a lot of legitimate reasons for a machine to call up someone, for an enterprise to call their customers. And so we want to make sure that we stop the bad guys, but let the legitimate guys get through. And the fact of the matter is, the way calls are being handled, it's still all percentages. And by the way, Stir and Shaken won't magically fix it. I would offer it would make call blocking better, because when you get a call that's attested from a number that you know is bad, then you can have total confidence blocking it. But there are going to be a lot of calls that are going to be in that gray area, and so we wanted a way to make sure that if you're a legitimate caller that does get blocked by a carrier or an enterprise, that you got some indication that that's what happened, as opposed to the customer just didn't want the call, which, that you always have to respect. While I was at the FCC, worked on a couple of interesting things. Probably the one I'm most proud of, and if you have UC solutions or enterprise PBX solutions, this probably would have affected you, which is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So I came for Stir Shaken and I left for that. Well, not like left, like I quit. I mean, that's actually the thing that I didn't even know was on the horizon, and I'm probably most proud of. It's 988. The idea is if you're in need or someone is in need, instead of remembering 1-800 273-8255, which pretty much doesn't spell anything. So how are you going to know the number? You're panicking. The number is 988. A couple of carriers have already turned it on. I think next summer is when everyone has to have it. And there was something actually really cool about being able to say, I worked on something that's going to save 1,200 lives a year and improve the outcomes for about 14,000. There are not many things you get to do in private industry that have those kinds of outcomes. But another thing, and this gets to Carl's point that I worked on, was in the Public Safety Bureau. And it was about our supply chain and about equipment and networks that could be under control of hostile governments. And what do we do about that? Worse yet, what do we do about it when it was the FCC that paid for it in the first place? A lot of, as you heard John say, hey, it's inexpensive equipment, and where do we find inexpensive equipment? Might be in rural areas where you need the costs to be really low. So I worked on some of the orders there for how do we address this, what's it going to cost, what's an upgrade path look like. And believe it or not, that's not what got me to the White House. But it was something we definitely worked on in the White House. What got me there, how many people here are doing the 5G part of IoT or 5G? Has anyone heard of 5G? So there's a swath of mid-band spectrum that's up for auction starting in August. And that was my task, was how to make that basically prime 5G real estate in the 3.5 gigahertz band, where it's got that Goldilocks property of very high bandwidth and pretty decent distance, pretty decent range, as opposed to the very high bands, which, like we have it at Georgetown down M Street, and if you have your phone out, you literally can get 1.6 gigabits. Oh, wait, I get nothing. My body's in the way. So that's kind of the problem with the high bands. And then the low bands is, 5G is getting 40 megabits instead of 20 megabits, but it's still pretty low bit rate. So this is in the Goldilocks. Pretty good band or transfer rates and pretty good distances. And then, while I was there, I worked on the Securing 5G implementation plan. This is how the federal agencies, DOD and Commerce, well, we can't tell the FCC what to do, but we could give them suggestions, how they will address 5G security, which includes a lot about supply chain. What do we look for? What constitutes sort of trustworthy? And actually, we were very careful not to say trustworthy, because we didn't want to be the good housekeeping seal of approval. Yes, you can buy from this company, but no, you can't buy from that company. We kind of did it the other way around. It's like, these are the characteristics of companies you don't want to buy from. All the others still do your own research. And one part of that implementation plan is standards. We had noticed that unlike in the United States, where we pretty much say standards are a private industry, academia kind of business, we want the best technology out there at the best price performance points, and let the companies kind of duke it out and come to consensus, come to agreement, and put stuff out. Other countries said, oh, hey, wait a minute. Those people in the free enterprise world, they also happen to have a lot of the fundamental patents on this technology, which, as John kind of alluded to, when we turned off the spigot, they realized we can't build phones anymore. We have to pay more for radios. And so they said, hey, we want that. But instead of kind of competing on the merits, and in a sense, it's very clear in the United States, we're okay on losing on the merits. The companies that John mentioned are Swedish, Finnish, South Korean, which, by the way, made my life pretty easy when we did the supply chain stuff, because we weren't saying, hey, we want to protect our industry, because we didn't have a major wireless equipment manufacturer to protect. So at the same time, that was the other thing that got me to go over to the White House, is what can we do so that we can have major people. Basically the goal to make your companies successful. So on the standards front, how do we combat when a government tells their companies how to vote? And privately, we would talk to people from American and European industry, and they say, yeah, we talk to our friendly Chinese companies, and they're like, we really want your technology, but we've been told that we have to vote for a particular Chinese national champion. So they weren't really happy about it. But the difference is here, if the State Department says, hey, you ought to vote this way, and you vote that way, the State Department goes, oh, well. Whereas in China, the repercussions for not doing what the government tells you can be swift and severe. There was a lot of talk about basically, well, we ought to do what they're doing, but more so. John mentioned, the discussions about, well, should we buy Nokia? Should we pump and subsidize American companies to the tune of billions of dollars? Should we basically abandon the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and allow companies to bribe their way into networks? And we decided it's not the way to go. It's a race to the bottom, and it's also then what's the point of being an open democracy? And that's why the emphasis on entrepreneurship, the emphasis on how do we build newer companies or established companies with new technology? How do we bring them to life? And part of that, because if you look at 5G, it's kind of like wireline-like connectivity over wireless. One of the things I'm working on is the Next G Alliance, initiative started by Addis, which many of you probably are familiar with Addis, on what's the next G after 5G. And one of the characteristics is basically blurring the wireless wireline thing. It's all about access, whether it happens to be over fiber, microwave, cellular. And you'll notice that a lot of the IoT people here are talking about like 5G connectivity for how do we get all of these sensors. And particularly a distinction between 5G and LTE is like on a manufacturing floor where if the hammer doesn't get the command in time to stop, you've just ruined hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product that you're building. In LTE, you can control stuff remotely, but it's kind of a best efforts kind of environment. And so again, how do we nurture, create, and grow? And so there are a lot of things that the government could fund, like on smart cities. A thing I was involved with was the DoD 5G test beds. And I know some of you here are actually participating in that. And the concept there was it's the taxpayers' dollars. So we're not going to give DoD money to support the communications industry. That would be inappropriate. DoD, when we think of DoD, we think about guns and bullets, but less than 10% of the personnel are on the ground or in the air or in the mud or on the seas warfighters. So it's basically one of the largest it's probably the largest logistics entity in the world. And so if you have a smart warehouse stocking toilet paper for the troops, a solution for that would probably be just as good as toilet paper for consumers. So the focus was on a lot of dual-use technologies where we could prove it out in a DoD environment where we weren't looking, well, what's this going to do to our quarterly returns? And then the concept was that the companies that developed that would take it to the private sector. And then really grow the markets, and we could have leadership. Because we have this problem. All right, we have this concept of 5G, but if you're a carrier, why would you build out a 5G network? Well, maybe because the government gave you a little bit of incentives, but that's not going to be a wholehearted full speed jump into it. And likewise, if you're an app developer, especially if you're not a startup, well, why am I working on 5G apps when there's no 5G network, there are no customers? And so this was a concept of priming the pump, creating a market for these apps which would encourage some build out of 5G, and then as the apps get proven, enterprises throughout the country, throughout the world would say, I want that too, which would get the carriers excited, which would get the app developers excited, and we get the virtuous cycle moving forward. I think, let's see, Rich, have I touched upon all of the different aspects of the show today? Talked about 5G, talked about voice over IP, stir shaken, talked about IoT. Anything, anyone? And government, what, Carl? Government opportunities. So, in a sense, it's the same story as DoD, only there's one less zero on the check. It's a lot smaller in smart cities, 10 like, got some North Carolina, some Washington State, which has state participation, which also tends to be relatively limited. Not complaining about it, actually saying there could be more. I understand yesterday there was a discussion, and probably the hardest part is privacy. And again, this was a thing we were working on, one of the big initiatives, and it's literally the same people from the last administration to this administration, still a priority in this administration, is AI. And one of the biggest things you need for AI is data. And again, we have a regime of opt-in, of respecting people's privacy. In fact, because you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, let me talk to you about, that's not true. Here's this, and this of privacy violations. The fact is, we know about this, and this, and we get very upset about it, and companies pay big fines. There are other governments that say, hey, this is really cool, collect all the data, because then we'll be a leader in AI, and oh, by the way, we can detect when there's a minority from the western part of our country. We see them in the eastern part of the country. We can put them in jail. We can inter them. We can re-educate them. The problem, like, for example, my thing that some people, especially on the carrier side, don't like me for this, telling probably legal robocaller that their call has been blocked. There's no redress in one system, a lot of redress in the other system. And so that's where there's a lot of interest in the scientific community on techniques like homomorphic encryption. How can we collect a ton of data? But instead of today's model of, well, we protect your privacy because we promise not to look, trust us. Because the technology in that situation has no idea whether someone's illegally looking or it's in a country where, in fact, not only is it legal to look, but you're compelled to look. And letting mathematics protect the privacy, where, no, really, not only can you not look, but even if you look, all you see is gibberish. So with that, I'll be happy to, hey, how's it going, Tree? Yeah, please. And actually, here comes a microphone.
So going back to your past technology guy with the FCC, it seems to me, a hosted voice over IP provider, that the FCC could have come out first with a simpler version instead of going right to stir shaken, such as working on just stopping overseas robocalls from coming into the US. Could you comment on that?
So, and this was one of my lessons learned, what did I not, it was Carl's question, what didn't I expect when I got there? One of the very first things I worked on was something even more obvious and simpler than that, which is if someone has placed a call and the caller ID is not assigned to any number, Or the caller ID is the number of the IRS's inbound call center. It never places an outbound call. It's very clearly an illegal call, very clearly. And so I was like, this is like the easiest thing in the world, totally non-controversial, because again, overseas calls, in fact, there was one shut down, a call center in a particular country that on the other side of the world. So during their night, they were legitimate customer service for a particular company, and during their day, they were doing illegal robocalls. So it's kind of hard, because you don't just say, well, block all calls from that source, because half the time they're legitimate. But this was one, it's just so obvious and easy and simple. And we did get that through. And the lawyers told me that that was one of the most difficult rules to get done, because the FCC had never had a rule. In fact, all of the FCC's rules were, hey, carrier, you under no circumstances can you block a call. Because that goes back to the 1910s, 20s, and 30s when AT&T was not delivering calls from any competitor as an anti-competitive move. Going to the international calls, it's even harder because we are a member of the International Telecommunications Union, and by we, it's the United States government. ITU is a government-to-government UN agency, and we basically say, we will deliver everybody's calls. So it's not because of a technology thing, it really is because of a legal policy thing. This is also partly, and I guess it's like yes to all of the above, because that's one of the points of shaken and stir, because, and anyone who's following the standards development right now, we're working on enterprise certificate delegations. So that legitimate call center in another country can have a legitimate certificate to attest, no, we're really calling on behalf of this enterprise. So that, and the idea is it doesn't make it go away. If they use that certificate to make an illegal robocall, they've still made an illegal robocall, but we can find them and do something about it, which we still today, we can't. We can see, yeah, there's lots of calls coming from overseas, we can block them, but that doesn't make them stop. And that's kind of the real goal. Stir shaken doesn't make it go away. It makes it so we can catch these people and make it go away. So, yeah. Well, and in a sense, especially if you're a carrier and you're still delivering internationally sourced, that's another kind of rumor going around. It's like, oh, foreign calls, all foreign calls won't get delivered because they won't have an attestation. And again, if you look at the FCC rules, they don't say you must have an attestation and must be A. It's if it's a US-sourced call, eventually it needs an attestation. And that you use that attestation in deciding whether to deliver the call. It doesn't say you must block a C or you must block no attestation, you must let through an A. Because, yeah, if you get that A attestation from a number you know is bad, you just whack it. But if it's a C attestation, that doesn't mean it's bad. That's where the analytics come in.
Hi.
Oh, all right, where the microphone? I'll go where the microphone is. But we got this person here. Oh, yeah, please.
Yes, question. We're an IoT consultancy, and we find that the number one problem with all of our customers is connectivity. Always has been, probably always will be. So one of the challenges is that standards are ill-defined, or there's always the next G. Like you mentioned, the next G. We have customers that have dumped thousands of 3G devices because they're no longer valid. Everybody's saying, what should we do to protect this to at least last 10 years? And so now with the 5G being kind of ill-defined and 6G and so forth, so what is the recipe for success here?
Yeah, that is really, really difficult because Congress decided that wireless was not going to be like wireline. In fact, if you look at the FCC bureaus, it's the Wireline Competition Bureau, We have to contain, we have to control, we have to regulate wireline. And it's the Wireless Technology Bureau. We have to be out there promoting all these new technologies. And one of the problems with new technologies, they often make old technologies obsolete. And basically, unless Congress gets involved, it then becomes kind of this optimization problem. In a sense, if there are millions of 3G IoT devices, you'd think there'd be carriers here and there that would see that as a business opportunity and continue to service them. Or the benefits of 4 and 5 and beyond G far outweigh the costs of effectively upgrading that installed base. The problem is, and what makes it a policy issue, is quite often the cost causer, which in this case would be like the carriers turning off 3G, is a cost to the IoT world, isn't the one that's bearing the cost. Your customers, the people who've deployed the IoT. It's a very hard problem, and in the United States, we've said we'll let the market decide. It's kind of like, it's not a satisfying answer, but that's the choice that we've made in the United States so far. I don't have to do it anymore, but just to make it clear, I am not speaking for the current or prior administration. I'm not speaking for the FCC, and well, this is Eric talking. All right, now, unless the microphone's someplace else. Oh, you got the microphone, awesome.
Yes, thank you. I had a question about broadband access. Over the last 18 months, it was obvious that many of our work from home requirements did not cover 10 or 20% of the children and families and businesses in the United States. And while there are initiatives that have been contracted out to many vendors, can you project when optimal services or capable services will finally be extended to rural families and businesses?
Yeah, that was, and again, this is a bipartisan thing. Everyone wants to address that. And it is a case of, well, if the idea is the market will take care of it all, then we can say it's a market failure. I have a whole half-hour talk on rural broadband deployment and the challenges. The end of the story is, if we as a nation, and we've said, Congress has said, like the FCC does what Congress says, it doesn't do what the administration says. We want everybody to have broadband access of a quality and a cost comparable to what's found in urban areas, basically. And let's see, that was 2012, so it's a decade later. We actually are better than probably any other country with our geography, but that's still not good enough. Depending on where you look, that means anywhere from 12 to 30% are really underserved or not served. And it's not just rural. And this is a thing that I think the current FCC is, well, actually Congress did tell the FCC to fix it. I talk not about rural broadband, I talk about underserved broadband. So it's not just like in northern New Hampshire where you have census tracts that are, it's like 4.2 kilometers long, and there's like a house here and a house here, and the house here is at the end of a street from another census tract that's served. And so it's been extended, so that's part of the census block is served. This down here is not. And when you look at census blocks in urban, it's 130 meters, so it is reasonable. I'm out of time, but it's being looked at all right, thanks. It's being looked at as how to make it so that people can afford it, people know they want it, and then third category user are people that kind of the tinfoil hat thing, and no government's trying to force them to take it, unlike other countries where you will have to be connected. Please.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about the CMMC?
How long do we have? But for those CMMC, the idea is like we had the capability maturity model for software development, Carnegie Mellon, SEI. different levels, how mature you are in your software development cycle. Obviously, cybersecurity, very, very important to the nation. And so we now have basically a cybersecurity maturity model. And the U.S. government pulls on the lever we've got. And again, we go back to DoD. DoD buys a ton of stuff. So, hey, if you want to be a vendor to DoD and you want our money, buy the CMMC. I see the hook coming.
Actually, I have one more question.
Prerogative, Carl's prerogative.
Okay, which...
when am I going to get off?
No. Oh, no. Way back when, before I think either one of us were actually working, there was a thing called CP&I, okay, which still applies to the carriers, where the carriers aren't allowed to sell data. We now have web browser privacy wars going on. Is this an FTC thing that's initiative? Is this the White House going to take? Is there anybody who's actually looking at whether or not there should be such a thing as CP&I for the browser industry?
I can do the fish look on that one.
Okay.
That's getting a little too close to home.
Okay. Okay, we will let go of it then. Please give Eric a round of applause.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, my friend.